Welcome to the Fangled Cast, brought to you by Fangled Technologies, where we help you convert every person your company touches into a voracious advocate for your brand. Welcome back to the Fangled Cast. Today, I'm really excited about a conversation with what I consider to be a great friend from many years past. We've lost touch over the years, and I discovered her work, and now we're back talking because I think it's really valid and beneficial for anyone who's really looking at the leadership skills within their organization. So I want to introduce you to Angela Cusack. She's with a company called Igniting Success, and rather than me botching the history of her story, tell us a little bit about Igniting Success and what your company does.
Oh, thank you so much, Andrew. It's wonderful to be back in connection and contact, and certainly to be with you today. So I appreciate the opportunity to talk about Igniting Success and the work.
Great.
So we are a global advisory firm, and we tend more often than not to work with mid-size and large-size companies and those startups, those special people in our lives that are the entrepreneurs, right, who are wanting to create something from nothing and really get lost in the minutia of how do I do that successfully. So that's kind of our sort of sweet spot, if you will.
Cool.
And as a part of the advisory firm, we do consulting, business advisory and consulting, and also my passion and love is to work with the leaders themselves from an executive coaching or executive reflection perspective.
Yeah, the thing that sort of led me to get excited about actually doing this podcast was a conversation that we had kind of getting to know each other again after all these years. And we were talking about people who can spot the elephant in the room. And you had made a comment to me that I just thought was brilliant about your ability to see the elephant in the room that nobody else can see.
Yeah.
I was hoping you could expand a little bit about that.
Yeah, the elephants, there's multi-dimensional elephants that are always sort of present in the face of conversations between you and me and a team, kind of living in the background, if you will. And what I like to say about that is that it's like living in the space between. So oftentimes I will say, what is it that is just below the surface?
Right.
That's not been spoken to. And that tends to be where we'll see those elephants. And so over the years, I've gained the ability to create a superpower, I guess one would say, to be able to kind of really dive in and notice what is happening or not happening inside of a conversation that will elicit the removal of the veil of whatever is wanting to be said or expose the elephant, if you will, or to notice what part of the elephant are you experiencing versus the part of the elephant that somebody else is experiencing, marrying the perceptions together to create the whole elephant.
So how does that play into a typical client engagement? Who are you able to help with this superpower? By the way, if I could have a superpower, it would be the ability to eat just one potato chip.
Oh.
Nobody in the world could beat that superpower.
You're absolutely right. You are so right. And that would be a huge superpower. So when you master that, you can teach all of us how to do that.
Yeah, I might keep it to myself. I'm a little greedy with the superpowers. But anyhow, in terms of the elephant in the room concept, though, when you're dealing with a new engagement, how does that play into dealing with an organization and helping them grow?
Yeah, so oftentimes CEOs and the executive team they believe that they're in the same conversation at the same time. And oftentimes what we see the elephant being is the context that's missing in the space, right? Okay. So you come into the room, you sit down, believe you know what the agenda is for the conversation and the meeting, yet you're bringing a whole set of other elements to this conversation that other people have no idea are even present, right? Contextually speaking and otherwise. And so does the CEO. And so without the exposure or putting out on the table what the context of the conversation is, to keep it pretty simple, it will create elephants to appear that others in the room actually do see, but they are limited by their ability to speak to what it is they're seeing. So we see executives pushing away from the table, or we'll see a CEO saying, let's table that, I'll take it offline, which creates a whole different set of spaces between and elephants to appear in the space. So in my work with them, it's always asking them who else is in the room, what are they bringing to the conversation, and if we could have everybody being in the same conversation at the same time, what magic might you imagine could actually get co-created in that space? And so it really is about just going deep very quickly. Sometimes it is about me just naming it, right? Naming the elephant that I see. So a quick story, yesterday I was with a client and four owners of a organization. And they were complaining about one of the senior folks. We're talking about their development plan. And I said, do you notice the complaint that you have about that leader being complacent? Do you notice anywhere else that shows up? Response was, Angela, I see the bubble that's starting to form above your head. And I said, oh, well, great. What's that bubble say? And the leader said, it says complacent. We're complacent because we are allowing her to continue to do the leadership moves that she's making, which we are dissatisfied with. And we're at fault for that, an elephant, right? So we exposed or unveiled exactly what was getting in their way to being successful.
So the power of the aha moment. That's really interesting. It's so many times I've come into engagements myself where you talk to an organization and we've tried everything. But what they've really tried is the same thing again and again and again. And with the stale eyes that have been looking at the problem, do you think probably just the fact that you're coming from the outside with none of the preconceptions is a big portion of how you're able to do what you're doing?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And I suggest that it is because I lived 25 years in corporate, where of that 25 years, 8, 9, or 10 of those years, I was actually acting in a very similar capacity as I do today with, being outside of the organization. There is a fundamental sense that if I can be an outsider who's also an insider, that's where the magic really is, because I have just enough context, just enough ability to see what it is they may be seeing to actually put a spotlight on it.
Makes sense.
So taking what I learned and I had a chance to practice in the corporate space, I pull that forward where it is possible, where I've developed those relationships to kind of be an insider, outsider, to bring that finesse and that ability to help them see the space between that otherwise would be missing for them.
Yeah, it goes back a little bit to a conversation I had in a different podcast that was recorded about professional coaches. And how do you find one and what qualifies someone for it? There's an interesting, and the data's all over the place. I don't know which number's real, but supposedly there's in the millions of people since the day COVID began who have changed their LinkedIn profiles to being coach. And many of them, as you look at the photos, and not to be ageist, but many of them don't look like they've had enough life experience to coach anything. And you look at some of the qualifications they have, and they've had a job out of college 2 years ago. I know your corporate background and the things that you've done that qualifies you. How often do you come across this with this sort of new movement and mindset that, well, I know enough to be an expert in my mind, so I'm an expert?
Yeah, go ahead.
No, that was a question.
Yeah. So, I don't make much of it, actually. Most of them are those that I have an opportunity to engage with, because I do mentor coaches in the space, whether they've got 20 years of coaching experience or they have 1 year of coaching experience. And what most don't come with is the corporate or technical background that allows them to sit in a room and gain the attention of the CEO. Whether, again, you're building your own business from scratch, or you are looking to take your business from maturity through innovation, right?
Sure.
So those that are on the cutting edge of their life's journey, they are tending to look for opportunities around team building or around how to just be a life coach, right? How do I help people in their own lives around this thing called depression, or dealing with transition of getting a job, so career-based. So they're much more specific in nature, I find, than being able to take on the experience, as you're pointing to, life experience, and being able to bring it to the table from a fiduciary or business perspective.
Sure.
Your aim is different.
Yeah, it seems to me that in that business coaching space where you're helping people, having a background like you do with multiple years within the corporate space is a huge reason to believe that you're going to know, at least from a contextual perspective, what it is that these people are doing and going through every day. I just when I look at it though, I wonder, and I see this quite a bit, like in sales, guys that become the sales manager who are hunter, guys who are out there fighting, and then they need to be a sales manager, and they're not equipped. They don't have the tools, because the very thing that made them successful in being that hunter salesman is the worst set of tools for trying to coach and help people.
You got that right.
Yeah, I'm curious how you were able to make that transition from being one of the players to someone who's now outside of that, looking in and trying to assist.
I made me think of my time in corporate, where we would do the same thing, right? We would advance a powerfully high-performing salesperson and promote them to sales manager, and they would ultimately fail, right? Because we took them out of their sweet spot on what they were passionate and their purpose was. But that was the only way they knew to advance in this so-called career. What I learned as a part of observing that and somewhat discouraging that from an internal coaching perspective is to say, I was able to kind of step outside of that realm because I knew what my passion and purpose were in life. And those two elements, when they intersect, is when work no longer becomes work. It becomes a love for helping people take whatever it is they're up to in the world and become wildly successful at it. Again, the name of the company, right? Igniting Success. When I had to kind of do some deep diving around, well, who am I for this world, and what is it that I really do believe I do, that I've been told that I do? That's where it always came back to is it's the spark, it's the ignition of seeing something that someone would not have normally seen. In that story that you just spoke to and that I referenced as well, when I was most successful internally, those particular sales managers would see the light, and they would go back to the place that they really loved and made more money they could have ever made, and actually found that they were far more successful and at peace, purpose and passion intersection.
Yeah, there's a common thread among successful people that I know, and there are a lot of very successful CEOs and otherwise. But the ones that seem to really have a passion for what they do are the ones who start with that spirit of kindness and giving in the workplace, not in the I am the boss, I am to be looked up to sort of mindset.
Yeah.
And I'm curious, in your engagement, how often that is the elephant that's in the room, is the ego of the leader, and how do you deal with that with a client?
Yeah, I don't typically deal with them.
Wise.
Right? I've had one experience in the last 4 or 5 years where I believe we could turn a corner. And so I gave all that I could give, only to find that there was so much resistance. And his love affair with himself and his incredible intellect that he had, that we just at the end of year 2 said, it has been great learning for both of us, and we're going our separate ways. And so unlike maybe others that you'll interview and be in conversation with, I'm pretty picky about who I work with and how I work with them. And I am very, the term I like to use, Andrew, is that I'm gently irreverent with people.
Yeah, I see that. I see that. Yeah, I've had engagements where, as from coming in as the fractional CMO for a company, and walked into the boardroom to meet with the executive team to talk about building that marketing strategy, and seen situations where, for example, the executive team would pre-meet before they would sit with the CEO because they had to polish whatever they were doing to not put a shiny object in front of the CEO and distract the meeting, or they had to tailor what they were saying to each other to not trigger one of his attacks or otherwise. And I tend very quickly to find a reason to not be part of that situation, because it's not sustainable. You're instead of doing the work and being intellectually honest, with the results and everything else, you're almost being influenced to, even though you've got great research and a direction to go, it's kind of outside what the CEO wants. So we'll change it. And then it's not the work that I'm being paid for. We just don't get involved in those engagements.
Yeah, actually, I'm going to flip that over, because what I do experience, because probably much like you,
Sure.
I'm hired by the CEO, so I have a first line view of saying, do I want to work here or do I not want to be a part of this, right? It's the executives underneath that actually I find play that game.
Yep.
So they have a model that they've come from a different organization that says the way to get to CEO is to be that way that you just described. Mm-hmm. And I've got several different companies of varying sizes that I'm working with, and it is unraveling that. And that sometimes comes to a choice, right? Where I sit with that individual and say, look, the culture by which you are operating doesn't match your brand image of the way you're leading. So the question becomes, who do you want to be given the environment that you're in? Because what I can promise you, it will not work here and it won't work in other places. In one particular situation of recent, the individual couldn't see it. Like, it didn't matter how much I poked, they were unable to experience it. I went to the CEO and I said, look, you're not doing your job. You're allowing this individual to do what they do. You're dismissing it. It's omission. No longer are you in integrity, and no longer is your organization in integrity. And last time I checked, that's important to you.
And very interesting.
Yeah, so he had a breakthrough conversation with him. The guy got shook up. All of a sudden, he is turning a corner. And sometimes revealing the elephant is saying to the CEO, you're not doing your job. Not me telling him what needs to be said, but through omission, you're no longer in integrity. And that seems to always drive home the point of, I get to be a better leader as a CEO to the people who I'm responsible for at the senior exec level.
Interesting. I'm curious to your approach to something. One of the most common things that I hear and other colleagues I work with here, you go into an organization because you're going to bring change, you're going to do something different, campaign, whatever that is. And the response is, just know people here don't like change. What's your approach?
When I hear we don't like change?
Yeah.
Yeah, my honest response to them is, well, guess what? Every day you wake up, every morning you're changing something, your clothes, your toothbrush, your hair, right? So bringing it back down to the basic sort of fundamental levels that we're changing every minute of every day, just as the human beings that we are, whether we want to or not. And so it isn't about resisting the change. It's about figuring out how do I accept how I'm changing, and now what about the environment is changing that also creates that sense of resistance in me in order for me not to accept that particular change. So I really draw it right back to sort of a very humanistic level of,
absolutely,
right? I got a gray hair, it's going to show up. It doesn't matter whether I like it or not, I'm going to have gray hair.
The other one in the same avenue with that always makes me smile, that's not what we do. And of course the voice in the back of the head says, well, that's what they hired me for, because they know you don't do it. That's why I'm here. But you don't verbally say that out there, because then you're just the smart aleck in the room. Yeah. But it fits in that same. I think it's that cliche of that's not what we do. This organization is resistant to change. All of that is more of a symptom of what's truly going on in the mind of the folks. And I know it's something that you handle well with your clients.
Well, thank you. Yes, it's that beautiful elephant that we just uncover and discover as a part of that journey.
Yeah, the process of reframing a lot of that stuff. Recently, I was in a conversation and the guy was saying, well, COVID is going on, so nobody wants to be sold. Nobody likes to be sold this time. And I went, you're insane. People love to be sold, because selling means what? That you're interfacing with someone, understanding a problem or an issue they have, and bringing them a result. That's what sales is. If people don't enjoy the being sold, it's because you're not doing it right.
Well, we certainly haven't hit what is of value to the person with which we're in the conversation with, right? The way working like you with salespeople my entire life and being a salesperson my entire life, even now, obviously, it's all about value creation. So where is the fair and equitableness in what I'm telling you you're going to get in return for what you're giving me in exchange? And so even with salespeople, I have them kind of reframe their own thinking of sales and have them think about it in terms of what is the value that I'm creating for the human or the company or the team that is in front of me? Mm-hmm. And can I stand in the promise that what I tell you will be created will actually be created? Right? Mm-hmm. There's that level of integrity in the value that I'm espousing. Then it's just a matter of saying, and this is the price by which I value this promise.
Sure.
Right?
Sure. Yeah, a lot of companies have really shifted towards doing a lot of, whether it's Myers-Briggs or DISC or multitask, doing these assessments to really understand people at the level. In sales, we do ones that actually look at all of that data and compare that data to high-performing salespeople that there's a database on to look at that. How often does that play into the kind of work that you're doing?
It varies. So my instrument of choice is Burkman. So it's called the Burkman Method, if you're familiar with it. And it really helps to get at the underpinning of a person. So it shows them the space between. So imagine finding out for the first time that you have a set of expectations about how the world is supposed to work as a human.
Right.
Well, we all have them. And so Burkman measures that component. That is a predictive model that says, if those expectations are met, then I'm going to be highly productive. I'm going to be on fire. I'm going to be my best. And if some portion of those expectations are not met, whether spoken or unspoken, then I move into stress. And then I'm not so pretty on a day-to-day basis. So at times I will use that instrument or invite clients to consider that instrument either in a one-on-one or team or organizational fashion. And it is always insightful and enlivening. I've yet to have, of the thousands and thousands I've done over the years, I've not yet had one person say, this isn't me. Yep. Except for me, when I got mine. And I'm like, this isn't me. Only to discover it was me. And that person that I saw there didn't resemble the way I saw myself. So when we talk about brands, culture, our internal cultural brand, our own culture inside of us, there's all of these little spaces that we sort of overlook to know exactly what is the experience that somebody else is having of me. And Burkman is a tool that allows us to do that and hopefully build teaming around that so I can better understand you, you can better understand me. So
it's excellent.
That happens to be my choice.
Yeah, I'm a huge proponent. And there are a lot of ones that work, and trying to get someone to adapt to one that they're not comfortable with doesn't work. As soon as you find one that just gives you that magic window into people, that's when you don't want to change.
That's right. That is right. Particularly when it changed you, right? So you can become super passionate about
absolutely
right the value that you've experienced and hoping that you can bring that to other people.
Yeah, well, we're almost out of time, but I always ask this question, and it's probably an unfair question, but what should I have asked you I haven't asked you?
Oh, that's a brilliant question. You should have asked me about my book that I'm writing. That's what you should have asked me about.
Hey, Angela, could you please tell me about that book you were writing?
Yes, I can. So I am in the midst of writing my first book called Discover the Matrix, which really gets at a lot of what we've talked about here today, right? Finding the entrance into discovering where the elephants live or the space between and how to listen and attend to them so that I, as a leader, can stay in integrity with what I've built the culture to be and vice versa. And so that I can keep the integrity aligned culturally with the brand promise that I'm putting out into the marketplace, right? So when I have that straight line of integrity from beginning to end, from top to bottom, side to side, front to back, then I've got an organization that everybody wants to be a part of. and investors are ready to take to the next level. So
that's really interesting. So basically what you're doing is you're promising to come back on to tell me about the book when it comes out.
I would be thrilled to. Thank you for the offer.
That'd be great. It's great. It's so great to see you again. It's been too long, and I really appreciate you coming on and joining the conversation. Very interesting. I'm so glad to have had you on today.
Well, thank you so much. And you know what? I will say to all the listeners is being with you is like picking up right where I left off decades ago, and it's an honor to be reconnected. I know you got to shake it off a little bit, don't you? They'll never know how old we actually are.
Oh, they'll cut us in half and count the rings like an old tree.
Exactly.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. Yeah.
Brought to you by Fangled Technologies, where we help you convert every person your company touches into a voracious advocate for your brand.